In an era when the planet's surface can be easily observed from satellites, hiding anything from the eyes of allies and opponents is almost impossible. This is especially true for various construction activities that attract the attention of foreign intelligence, even from space. This method of obtaining information is, in a way, a privilege of our time, since in the past, such things were simply unthinkable. This collection features the most intriguing cases that occurred due to satellite imagery. Enjoy watching. Not all brilliant ideas prove to be such in practice. Just take the Camp of the Century, better known as Camp Century. This was an American military research base on the territory of Greenland, built in 1959 and abandoned as early as 1967. It was originally intended as a prototype for a new type of construction base in Arctic conditions, where the camp would not be located on the surface, but beneath the glacier. To achieve this, builders used tunneling techniques rather than traditional pile foundations. Overall, the construction of the base was successful, and on initial inspection, it seemed quite comfortable. In addition to standard living quarters for the camp's staff, there were also bathrooms, medical units, dining areas, and enough space for fuel and food storage. The temperature below was maintained by a nuclear reactor, and since the base was located under a glacier, it was immune to external weather conditions. However, a few oversights in the construction became fatal for the Camp of the Century. Firstly, the base required regular tunnel maintenance, specifically the manual removal of expanding ice, which was problematic in underground facilities. Secondly, ventilation was not accounted for during construction, so the smell of sewage spread throughout the entire underground complex and soon made staying there unbearable. Even the subsequent emergency installation of a ventilation system did not entirely solve the issue, although it significantly reduced the aromatic apocalypse. In addition, liquid waste affected not only living conditions, but also the ice masses themselves, as it seeped into the glacier and caused tunnel deformation. Based on the results of this experiment, one could conclude that the subglacial camp was a technically successful project, since it was built and functioned for quite some time, and the accompanying issues were entirely solvable. However, after the base was abandoned and forgotten, future problems began to surface. According to data obtained by NASA, dangerous waste, both human and nuclear reactor related, remains beneath the glacier. Currently, all this wealth is still securely sealed in the ice, but according to climate scientists' forecasts, by the year 2100, the Greenland ice sheet will significantly diminish, and all the waste may end up on the surface, potentially contaminating the island's ecosystem. While the Danish authorities are still pondering what to do with this looming problem, the USA is desperately eager to seize control of the island while there is still time to deal with a once-made mistake. The attitude toward the Democratic People's Republic of Korea has long been one of caution from many countries. And it is no surprise, as even today, this state adheres to a totalitarian form of government with a hereditary dictatorship. In recent years, however, control over the country has begun to soften slightly, but these are more like minor relaxations than a real change in the form of governance. Such an inflexible state in terms of administration and development raises suspicions throughout the democratic world, which starkly distinguishes it from its neighbor, the Republic of Korea, better known as South Korea. For millennia, the Korean Peninsula was a unified state, but after the end of World War II it became divided, and its two parts fell under the influence of completely different political agendas. North Korea came under the guidance of the USSR, while control over South Korea was assumed by the USA. It took only a couple of years and one civil war to divide the once unified nation into two opposing camps, fiercely unwilling to hear to each other out. Perhaps that is why the DPRK placed great hopes on its nuclear program, which it launched in response to threats from Japan and the US, both of which had, for decades, promised to use such weapons on its territory. However, these threats were never realized, as North Korea was under the protection of the USSR and, additionally, signed an agreement with the Union for the training of nuclear specialists. Together, the countries managed to achieve significant success in uranium enrichment technology, which is used as fuel for nuclear reactors. In the 1970s, Chinese scientists joined the program, which greatly accelerated the research process and enabled the Democratic People's Republic of Korea to develop nuclear weapons to ensure its own security. Having become a participant in the nuclear arms race, the DPRK soon clashed with the interests of the United States, and although it was forced to sign an agreement, it withdrew from it shortly after the conflict. Against this background, it was no surprise that the United States began to closely monitor North Korea, paying particular attention to the Sinuri Missile Operating Base, located not far from Pyongyang, the country's capital. For a long time, U.S. intelligence believed this base could serve not only as an academy for training artillery officers, but also as a storage facility for ballistic missiles. This circumstance fueled the tense relations between Korea and the USA from 2015 to 2017. However, tensions eased significantly after a treaty was signed between the countries. According to this document, the United States pledged to guarantee the security of Pyongyang, and the DPRK in turn committed to completely abandoning the use of nuclear weapons. And although North Korea dismantled several of its nuclear facilities under the treaty, some of them likely remain active, albeit strictly classified, which is of no comfort to the United States. What particularly angered them was the fact that the Sinuri base was not only left intact, but is actively being expanded, without full disclosure of its purpose. The United States' excessive concern over the nuclear programs of other countries is more than justified, considering its leading position on the matter, desperately trying to impose a nuclear deterrence agreement while simultaneously hindering the development of such technologies in Middle Eastern countries. The USA continues to monitor every step taken by its adversaries. Special attention is paid to Iran, which is currently at war with Israel, an American ally. But even before the armed conflict, the USA had been keeping a close eye on perhaps Iran's most important nuclear facility, the Natanz nuclear power plant, also known as the Shahid Ahmad Roshan nuclear facility. The United States first learned about this secret plant from Alireza Jafarzadeh, an Iranian dissident and representative of the People's Mojahedin Organization of Iran in the USA. Until that moment, Americans had believed that Iran's nuclear program was much less developed than it actually turned out to be. Immediately, satellite reconnaissance was directed toward Natanz, aiming to capture the scale of the threat. Unfortunately, most of the uranium enrichment facility could not be photographed, as the centrifuges are located 40 to 50 meters underground and are additionally protected by a concrete barrier nearly 8 meters thick. Such protection not only prevents aerial surveillance, but also serves as a barrier in case of uranium leakage. Such a scenario is entirely possible, as the Shahid Ahmad Roshan facility has repeatedly been subjected to cyber attacks, sabotage, and missile strikes, the most recent of which occurred on June 13, 2025. One of the first cyber attacks caused minor but significant damage to the development of Iran's nuclear program. At that time, a coalition of several Western intelligence agencies sabotaged the plant by launching the Stuxnet computer virus into its systems, with the primary goal of disrupting the normal operation of the centrifuges. These countries achieved their objective, forcing Iran to sign the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action on its nuclear program in 2015. In 2020, the facility experienced an explosion and fire caused by an attack from the group Homeland Cheetahs on the Natanz nuclear power plant. The most recent attack on Iran's nuclear facility happened just recently when Israel, as part of Operation Rising Lion, launched massive missile strikes on the plant. Although no external damage was reported, Iranian authorities have stated that damage was indeed done, which may provoke radiation contamination of the area for several decades, potentially triggering spikes in cancer development among local residents. The confrontation between China and the USA did not start yesterday, nor will it end tomorrow. The USA's desperate ambition to establish its dominance everywhere it can faces fierce resistance from other superpowers such as Russia and China, much to America's dismay. Perhaps that's why they don't shy away from any means to seize the initiative in a region and prevent anyone else from taking the lead. And if they fail to take a leading role, a wave of condemnation from the Western world, effectively the eternal satellites of the USA immediately follows. There are too many places to list where American and Chinese interests clash, but in the case of the Ream Naval Base in Cambodia, things are not as straightforward as they may seem. This port suffered heavily during Cambodia's civil war in the 1970s and could no longer be used for its intended purpose. Moreover, even repair work was difficult to carry out, as Cambodia simply didn't have the capacity at the time. As a result, the newly formed government received assistance from the Khmer National Navy and some British sailors, who not only restored the base, but also made significant improvements. This precedent not only opened the doors of the naval port to other countries, but also enabled the temporary establishment of leading positions in the South China Sea, which was used by both the Cambodian Army and Vietnam, a U.S. ally. However, in 2019, the USA claimed that, according to secret agreements between Cambodia and China, the latter had received exclusive rights to station its fleet at the Ream Base, occupying at least a third of the port. This situation is completely unacceptable to the USA, as it would grant Beijing not only rights to a strategically important base, but also the potential to completely shift the regional balance of power, although both China and Cambodia deny the existence of such an agreement, justifying the Chinese naval presence as assistance in the reconstruction of the port. Their unconvincing statements are hard to believe, especially given China's growing influence over the Gulf of Siam. Lacking the necessary power to remove Chinese forces from the South China Sea, the USA condemns the situation in every way possible, masking its outrage as concern over Cambodia's interests. And the small country that owns this port can only be sympathized with, because when two superpowers fight for influence, no one even bothers to ask its opinion. The Yakutian settlement of Tiksi, located on the shore of the bay of the same name in the Laptov Sea, is the northernmost port of Russia, since it was from there that the development of the Northern Sea Route began. Although the Maritime Gate of Yakutia belongs to the Bulunsky district of the Republic of Sakha, to reach the capital of the region, one must travel more than 2,000 kilometers. That's about a third of Europe, and to reach Moscow from Tiksi, one would have to travel nearly 4,300 kilometers in a straight line. But by road, this distance more than doubles. In 1933, Mikhailov, the head of the main directorate of the Northern Sea Route, decided to establish a settlement beyond the Arctic Circle. At the time, the Lena River was being actively studied, and the secluded bay opening into the Laptov Sea seemed like the perfect place for a base for the future development of the Arctic. That same year, construction cargo and coal for wintering were delivered to Tiksi via the Lena River. Within 5 years, the settlement grew and strengthened, acquiring not only residential buildings for port workers, but also a weather station and 3 radio wave transmitters. In 1957, the Polar Geocosmophysical Observatory was completed and opened there. Although Tixi's population is less than 5,000 people, this is more than enough to service and maintain all key facilities in working condition, including a federal airport for state and civil aviation. Each stage of human evolution is characterized by its phase of scientific and technological progress. In the ancient world, the greatest achievements were stoneworks of architectural art, the mysteries of which remain unsolved to this day. The modern era, however, can be described as an age of space exploration and information technology, where each country strives to gain dominance in the exploration of the boundless expanses of the universe. Unfortunately, such projects are very expensive, so not all states can boast achievements in this rapidly developing field of science. For a long time, the leading positions were shared between the USA and the USSR, and later Russia as the successor to that defunct country. But China is also not willing to fall behind. Unlike these space pioneers who have proven themselves favorably, the PRC has chosen a different path, exploring the universe at a leisurely pace, ignoring the ambitious projects of other nations. Currently, their leading development is a new generation manned spacecraft known by the codename Shenlong, which means Divine Dragon. This reusable manned craft can break through the atmosphere, but it is clearly not intended for long-distance flights. Its main task is likely to deliver various objects into orbit, which could be anything from regular satellites to parts of an advanced spacecraft for interplanetary travel. The longest mission of Shenlong lasted 276 days and ended with the successful landing of the craft in the Gobi Desert. During its extended stay in low Earth orbit, the Divine Dragon successfully completed all planned maneuvers for docking, delivery, transmission, and reception of signals from other objects. This program has become a rather ambitious endeavor in China's space exploration, and possibly Shenlong may be able to push the USA, particularly the company SpaceX, off its pedestal of honor. As humanity's demand for energy continues to grow, it has become clear to everyone that the use of fossil fuels is not a viable long-term solution. Sooner or later, mineral resources will run out, and without an adequate alternative, all technological progress will come to a halt or even regress. That's why many countries are concerned with so-called green fuel, a source of renewable energy that can be generated from nothing. The simplest examples of such systems are solar panels or wind turbines. But the energy they produce is catastrophically insufficient, and they are unable to fully replace fossil fuels. That's when scientists came up with the idea of using controlled nuclear fusion to generate clean energy virtually out of nothing. To explore this concept, the United States built the National Ignition Facility, NEF, in 2009. It required colossal funding and a full 13 years of work to achieve a positive result in the fusion reaction capable of generating the necessary energy. Now, inspired by their colleagues' example, the Chinese government has decided to begin constructing a large-scale facility for studying laser nuclear fusion in the Mianyang region, surpassing the American NF in all respects. Thanks to satellite images, it has been observed in detail. Externally, the building resembles a giant cross-shaped structure with laser systems located on the outer arms, leading to a central experimental chamber. Although the Chinese complex is still under construction, American scientists are already raising alarms, fearing a loss of leadership in this field. Only time will tell whether the laboratory of key devices for laser fusion will manage to surpass the Americans, who have already achieved certain success and who will ultimately have the last word in developing the energy technology of the future. The US government closely monitors the actions of all its potential adversaries, paying special attention to Russia and China. Every construction project of unknown purpose sparks a flood of questions among Americans, but as history shows, no one is in a hurry to answer them. That's when satellite images come into play, allowing them to track opponents' actions directly from space. Of course, few can vouch for the accuracy and reliability of such data, but sometimes the images reveal very intriguing objects that send chills down the spines of American analysts. For example, starting in 2013, the US military began closely watching a construction site deep within China, suspecting it to be a strategic facility of major importance. For almost 10 years, they monitored the development until in 2022, a satellite image revealed a dirigible, and then everything fell into place. It turned out that the Chinese military had been developing a special stratospheric airship capable of hovering in one spot for extended periods, allowing for higher quality surveillance. It also doesn't need to descend regularly for refueling, as it's powered by solar panels. Additionally, due to its capacity, the airship can host a full-fledged surveillance station on board, making it easy to detect the previously dominant US stealth fighters like the F-35. The contrast between the expensive-to-build and maintain fighter jets and lightweight, budget-friendly airships shook Americans' confidence in their air superiority, prompting serious concern about the future of their intelligence capabilities. Although the Cold War era between the US and the USSR has long passed, any strange and inexplicable Russian construction site continues to cause alarm in the minds of Americans. Perhaps one of the most classified sites is located on Mount Yamantau in the southern Urals, discovered by satellites, and it became the final straw for the Americans. When the US demanded the truth from Russia about this site, they were told absolutely nothing, with the argument that revealing such data to a potential adversary was inappropriate. Outraged by this response, the Americans began speculating about what might be hidden there. Theories emerged about a bomb shelter, an underground city, possible nuclear weapon silos, and other, sometimes rather fantastic assumptions. Naturally, the Russian government neither confirmed nor denied any of these theories, leaving the Americans to continue developing their own hypotheses. The truth is known only to the Russian authorities, but they prefer not to make it public. The territorial waters of countries are a highly sensitive area for every state. Even a slight border violation, even if unintentional, can lead to serious international problems. Things become even more serious when the crossing of another country's territorial waters is intentional and all radio transmissions are ignored. Such an incident occurred at the end of summer 2020, when a fleet of fishing vessels flying Chinese flags entered the territorial waters of the Galapagos Islands and began fishing, having turned off tracking devices and transponders. As a result of this venture, relations between the countries became strained. However, after negotiations between Beijing and Ecuador, an agreement was reached whereby Chinese sailors are prohibited from approaching the island's border for 3 months. In this situation, it is easy to understand Ecuador, because when a fleet of over 200 ships approaches your borders, you can't help but suspect an attack. And although there was no actual threat to the country's territorial integrity, such a massive catch of fish and other marine life could have negatively affected the ecosystem of the Galapagos Islands. Satellite imagery is a true scourge of classified information, which the leadership of any country tries to conceal at all costs. Alas, hiding a massive army or a large-scale construction site from the invisible eye in the sky is as difficult as saving someone doomed. At the same time, completely avoiding territorial expansion is not an option either, so one must be prepared to answer uncomfortable questions from foreign colleagues about the purpose of the construction and its intended use. The Chinese authorities found themselves in such a situation when they embarked on a grand-scale construction project southwest of Beijing. According to U.S. intelligence data obtained via satellites, the construction was almost completed in just 2 years, and its purpose is most likely military. This is indicated by the abundance of deep shafts, which are theoretically intended to serve as bunkers for sheltering Chinese officials and top military command in the event of a nuclear war. Although the Chinese themselves refuse to disclose the purpose of the site, they claim there is no cause for concern, as they do not plan to start any wars in the coming years. Nevertheless, such a massive project, whose size exceeds even the world-famous Pentagon by 10 times, is bound to raise suspicions among neighbors, allies, and adversaries regarding its future use. Supporting this theory is also the fact that the Beijing military region has always been the center of the country's armed forces, and such a large-scale construction project was definitely in their interest and may serve to strengthen the troops stationed there. In addition, the Americans believe that the PRC will never sign a mutual nuclear deterrence agreement, even considering that China still lags slightly behind the US and Russia, though only by a small margin. After the end of World War II, it became clear to all countries that battles would no longer be fought as they once were. Head-on clashes would more likely turn into a relatively peaceful method of warfare, while missile launches targeting cities and nations would become the warfare of the future, leaving people with no chance of survival. The Soviet Union, which suffered the greatest losses in World War II, understood this like no one else. Not wanting to expose itself to attacks and hastily beginning the development of missile weapons, it was decided to build a military testing site for trials of prototypes created in the USSR. The site chosen for construction was Kapustin Yar, covering vast areas in the Astrakhan region near Kazakhstan. Although the range was officially opened a year after the war ended, on May 13, 1946, and was originally called the State Central Test Site of the Ministry of Armed Forces of the Soviet Union for testing missile weapons, including the first Soviet ballistic and anti-aircraft missiles, its exact location was only determined on June 3, 1947. In just 1 year, Kapustin Yar was equipped with a bunker, a test stand, a launch pad, and other necessary buildings for conducting tests. However, residential facilities for staff were not built for about another year, forcing military personnel and scientists to live in the village of the same name among local farmers. As part of the testing program, missiles such as the V-2, seized from the German army after the war, R-1, R-2, R-5, R-12, R-14, and others were launched, developed by prominent Soviet engineers like Korolev, Grachev, and Yengel. During the space race era, Kapustin Yar was transformed into a cosmodrome, from which the first satellite Cosmos 1 and all subsequent models of this series were launched. Until 2008, satellites continued to be launched into orbit from this site, after which the launch pad was dismantled. Additionally, nuclear tests were conducted at Kapustin Yar, which caused irreversible damage to the water and soil in the area. Elevated levels of radioactive isotopes, exceeding acceptable limits several times over, were discovered, negatively affecting the health of local residents living in close proximity to the site. And, of course, foreign intelligence could not ignore such a potentially dangerous test range. As early as 1953, a successful attempt was made to gather information about Kapustin Yar using a Canberra aircraft. This aircraft managed to successfully capture images of the secret site and escaped save the pursuing MiGs, after which it relayed the intelligence data to Western agencies. Thus, the Soviet Union had a real reason to develop programs for satellite and aerial reconnaissance of military's objects in other countries, which significantly advanced the country's intelligence capabilities. Sometimes, while watching movies, one can't help but think, well, that just couldn't happen in real life. And although you continue enjoying the story, you begin to view it with a certain degree of skepticism. However, the truth is that reality can be even more unbelievable. A vivid example of an incredible coincidence was the discovery of the secret Yulin military base in the Chinese suburb of Sanya, Hainan province. For a long time, U.S. military officials suspected the unusual use of Hainan Island in the South China Sea, not only due to its prominent military port, but also because access to much of the island was restricted, despite its ideal conditions for tourism. However, the Americans lacked direct evidence of a secret base. That changed when the company Planet Labs accidentally captured a satellite image at the exact moment a Chinese military submarine was entering an underwater cave near the port. At that moment, the US obtained undeniable proof of the military base's location, and the Chinese authorities, no doubt, were left shaking their heads in frustration over the accidental revelation of their secret facility. For human society to grow and develop, people had to make a significant impact on the natural environment, which greatly undermined its natural growth. There's no need to look far for examples. To this day, the tropical forests of the Amazon, crucial for the planet's ecosystem, are subjected to regular and largely illegal deforestation, which harms not only the region but the entire Earth. The reasons for cutting down forests are numerous, ranging from the banal expansion of agricultural land to the illegal extraction and sale of valuable timber species, as well as the development of mineral deposits such as gold. In addition to harming the planet itself, the indigenous peoples of the Amazon, many of whom are uncontacted tribes that must not be approached due to the risk of disease, suffer greatly. But despite bans imposed by the authorities, many farmers and industrial enterprises continue their illegal activities, completely ignoring the potential consequences for themselves and for the planet. However, with the help of satellite images, monitoring the state of forests and identifying violators has become much easier. In just a few years, reducing timber extraction has helped to slow the pace of desertification by almost half, which has also affected the risk of fires, even despite the severe drought that hit the region in 2023. If this trend continues, South American countries will not only be able to significantly reduce the risk of desertification, but will also have time to restore part of the forests by 2030. And that's all from me. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon. Your engagement is the best reward I could ask for. Thank you for watching. See you soon. Bye.